Kathy Law, and this is our first episode of Law on a Gravel Road. And my first guest for this new podcast is Gabrielle Vázquez. Thank you, Gabrielle, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Kathy. I'm so excited to see you launching this podcast. I think it's so important for Iowa, and I'm really excited that I'm your first guest.
Yeah, I'm excited too. We first met maybe 6 months ago through the Iowa State Bar Association, and so I really appreciate having this opportunity to visit with you about this. So I know you originally started practicing in New York, is that right?
Yes, that's where I went to law school, and I kept working there for about 15 years.
Okay, what kind of practice did you have in New York?
Commercial litigation, primarily. I started at a litigation-heavy law firm, and then I started going a little bit smaller and smaller, and dabbling a little bit more, but it was always business and litigation.
And what made you go from a larger firm to start going to smaller and smaller firms?
I think for me, I realized at some point that the size and magnitude of the cases that we were working on at that first larger firm wasn't going to allow me as a young attorney to get the variety of experience that I needed to sort of stand on my own 2 feet. And part of that was, interestingly, being open to speaking to people who were recruiters, who, even though I wasn't necessarily looking, would tell me, this is sort of the skill set you're expected to have at year 3 or year 5. And so I had a good familiarity of the type of skills I should have had in order to be marketable. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to sustain that doing big cases, because the way it worked was that it was divided into teams, and a young associate might be working on the same type of skill for years. So by the time I was a 5th year, the market said I needed to have deposition experience and court experience and writing experience. But I graduated 2007, and we were in the middle of e-discovery really becoming a huge thing in the legal market. And so I could have easily spent 3 years just doing that. And that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, that's one of the effects of being in a larger law firm. You don't get that breadth of experience that you do.
Yes.
So how did you end up coming to Iowa?
Well, I had family here. That's the easiest answer. And so I had become aware of Iowa. I mean, I knew it was a state, obviously, but I didn't know much about it. But one of my family members moved here for a job, and his family was having just the best time of their lives. They'd probably been here for about 5 years by then. The kids were thriving, and I came to visit a couple of times, and it was actually on their second trip to New York for Thanksgiving that they showed me their listing that they're putting an offer in on their first home. And I fell out of my chair when I saw a third of the price of what I was paying in New York for the same square footage. And I said, what am I doing? And by then I was already working remotely at my law firm, which was still New York City based. All of us were in the area, but I was already remote. So it just sparked in me the question of, do I even really need to be in New York City to do this type of law that I'm doing?
Okay, so how long did it take before you decided to make the leap?
Not long. I immediately, after Thanksgiving, I started researching, every open time that I had, I was Googling costs of homes, cost of schools, and comparing. And as I have throughout my whole life, I grew up in Puerto Rico, so I considered moving back to Puerto Rico as well. And just looking at the economics, I had a very extensive spreadsheet that would sort of project out what the cost and lifestyle would be like at 3 different locations: the New York City area, the Des Moines area, and San Juan, Puerto Rico.
And what made the decision become Iowa?
The spreadsheet. You couldn't not decide Iowa when you saw the numbers. It decided itself. I did want to be near family, so I knew I wanted to leave New York at that point if I could. And so most of my family was in Puerto Rico. That had a big pull. But the cost of living, the benefits of education for my daughter, who is now 9, but at the time was 3. And that was a big part of it as well, picking a place that would have a good education and economic benefit. But also as a lawyer, I had to make sure that I could still practice. And even though I had a remote position with a law firm in New York City, I wasn't totally sure how that would go because we were all local at the time. So I had to factor in, where can I wave into the practice of law relatively easily without having to take another exam. Comparing to Puerto Rico, that was a big difference. In Puerto Rico, they have Spanish common law, and so I would have had to take a whole new bar exam. The state court practices in Spanish, so there was no waving in process. Here I was able to wave in, and then of course, even the salaries for lawyers, there was a big disparity where Puerto Rico was the lowest. And so there was just a difficult decision for me, but I had family here too, so I said, this is the right place to raise my child.
Now, when you came, did you stay with your law firm in New York, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I approached them. I told them the difficult news that I had made this decision for my family. And I said, are you willing to see if we can make this work? And we had discussions about the details that I'll spare you today, but ultimately they said, let's try. We don't know if it'll work. And I said, me either, but let's try it. And they said, okay. So I came over, that was October 2019, and I had, like I said, a very elaborate spreadsheet whereby I had calculated I would be back to New York quarterly. It ended up being every other week with a 3-year-old that I just moved cross country. And so that was rough. But then the world blessed me with work from home for all. So I was able to stop flying around when COVID started. And that lasted for several years. So yes, I was with them for probably another 5 years after I moved.
And at some point you decided to open up your own practice in Iowa. What made you make that decision?
Again, I'd say similar to when I decided to come to Iowa, the numbers kind of spoke for themselves. After the COVID restrictions kind of got better, I actually went to an Iowa State Bar Association event. That was my first being out in the open. And I think it was like an annual conference or maybe even a Bridge the Gap, something like that. But there were a lot of attorneys. And I sat in and I got a feel for the sort of legal landscape. And I said, okay, I could do this. And then I went to a conference, a Fem City conference, which is like the big women's business group here. And again, I felt great. I was like, I'm meeting great people. The energy and enthusiasm, the entrepreneurial spirit here was so great and very welcoming. So I said, okay, I'm going to look into this. And I always knew that if I wanted to really grow a practice in Iowa, I had to make a lot of effort because I was attached to a New York firm. I'm an outsider coming from a big city. And so I had to establish myself in a place where not only was I a relatively unknown factor, but also the practice I was building was relatively unknown. And so I just had to really dive in and do some analysis. What's the best way to do this? And I worked with an excellent marketer who helped me determine what it would be like to make this push within my law firm at the time or to do it on my own. And it spoke for itself. There wasn't much left for me to decide. I had to invest in making myself a known quantity here.
And what have you found to be different about practicing in Iowa?
I have had a wonderful experience where I've been able to integrate in the business community. And I don't know how much of that is because Iowa's different versus myself and how I've approached it. But in my prior iteration and my prior practice in New York, I oftentimes found myself surrounded by other attorneys, other, high-level legal practitioners. And rarely was I in a room with business people. And here, I don't know if it was because I was starting my own firm, but the business community was incredibly warm and welcoming. And I found that it was easy to just chat and get to know them. So that was very different for me.
So do you think it's easier to have direct client contact in Iowa than it was in New York?
Absolutely. And I will say that part of that might be the scale as well, sort of similar to leaving a big firm with big clients. The types of clients I would have needed to attract at, for example, that first law firm, we're talking Fortune 500 companies. Where was a fifth-year associate who was doing electronic document review going to meet the CEO of this Fortune 500 company or their general counsel? Unlikely. And I think here, not only am I practicing smaller cases, smaller law, I'm in the room with all of the leaders of the various organizations here. And I found it just, people are more accessible in that way. Business is more accessible.
I found that in my practice too, that you get a lot of direct client contact, and that's so important, especially when you're doing business litigation and business practice.
Absolutely.
You have to know what your client's business is like and get
Yeah.
to know them. That makes a huge difference in how you represent them.
Yeah.
So that's great.
And that might be a cultural thing too here. People are a little more accessible and sort of like integrated lives between their personal lives and their business lives. So
And it can be a lot easier just to see clients here too in Iowa because a lot of them are close.
Yes.
And it's not long distance travel or anything too. So I
Yes,
think that
that's
makes
true.
a difference. So was this a slow build up to get to your own practice, or was it a huge leap?
well, I guess it depends how you look at it. It took me, 18 years to decide to finally do it. And I actually went out to do my own law firm probably 10 years ago. It lasted a month because I met my partners and decided to join up with them, and we did it together. So then since then, I made the decision again, probably in the spring of last year. And, I had all the intentions to take my time to set it all up properly. And then I just got so wrapped up in it and so excited, and it all happened quite quickly after that.
That's great.
Yes.
So what opportunity did you see in Iowa that maybe some other people are overlooking?
So in my particular situation, I was very focused on the business community, and I went out to try to figure out who's already out here doing what I do. That was sort of step one. Like, how many other commercial litigators are there? What types of cases are they handling? I looked at the dockets to find out what's happening in federal court, what's happening in the Iowa Business Court, which I was excited to see existed because New York has one too, and it's where I ended up primarily practicing by the time I left. But in a lot of other states, those big business cases tend to go to federal court. So it was exciting to see that that was there. That was a good indicator to me that the state is ready and prepared to handle business litigation. And so, yeah, I just started looking at what's on the docket in this way and who's out there, who are the attorneys out there. When I go and network with the business people, are there other attorneys in the room? And what are they doing? And I noticed that there weren't that many. There weren't that many business attorneys out and about. And speaking to some of the people I met with, like clients, business owners that I met with at the beginning, they were telling me about, I know I hear it around here a lot, the desert, and I've heard it in connection with the work you're doing with the rural practice, right? It's like a desert, and I know that we have that issue as well, like in the criminal defense side of things.
Yes, we do.
So I'm seeing it in the business side too, and I would say in the business litigation side in particular. And I think everywhere, not just in Iowa, the smaller businesses have a really hard time finding legal counsel.
I do too, and a lot of the research we've done through about rural practice has shown that too, that we don't just have legal deserts in rural Iowa, we have a shortage of attorneys in Iowa in general. So that's something we're also trying to address.
I believe it. I'm not as knowledgeable about the numbers as you probably are, but just having been out there and talking to people, I do get that sense.
So what's been harder than you expected it might be?
I think that in general, as a solo attorney starting out, the lonely factor is probably the hardest. And I'd say that's my own fault for not expecting it because literally everybody told me about that. But it's different when you experience it. So people will tell you like, yeah, but then you won't have like a colleague to talk to or bounce things off. And I didn't really fully understand that, what that really meant and felt like until I was there. So I think that was something that I hadn't really properly expected.
That sounds good. What's been easier than you expected about moving to Iowa and practicing?
So I'd say with the practice and launching my own firm, I had built up a huge monster in my head about attracting clientele on a regular, like sustained basis. That seemed really like it was Mount Everest to me. That was how daunting it felt to truly put that completely on my own shoulders for the first time. And I will say that the reception of the community here in Iowa, the business and legal community, was so warm and inviting, and I feel very surprised, and I'm in awe every time of how relatively easy it has been to acquire new clients.
Well, we're really known for having a collegial legal community in Iowa. I think that's something that a lot of people appreciate when they come here.
Yeah.
Because we have so few attorneys, and if you're even in an area like Des Moines, which we consider to be a large area, you're going to meet the same attorneys over and over. So everybody tends to kind of get along and just try to get the deals done.
Yeah.
And build those relationships over time.
That makes sense.
So what's one thing that people don't tell you about starting your own firm that you'd like others to know?
I think that you can do it. It's probably the thing people weren't saying. That it's not as scary as it sounds, that you have the skills and the mentality and the training and the ability, and that once you really do your research and put your plan in place, you are likely to succeed. You just have to take the steps, right? And especially the big one, the initial one, to say, I'm doing it, and really commit to it.
And how has your community contributed to your practice, or how did that help?
Oh my gosh, it is the practice. This is all it feels community-based. And I know it's like, I'm not obtuse to the fact that I'm a business lawyer and that feels still distant to people, but I am so constantly surrounded by small business owners or someone who knows a small business owner. And just really, it's all connected. Whether it's people from my daughter's school that I'm meeting, or, at these networking events and I'm meeting these women entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily need a lawyer that day, but they know who I am, and that's enough. Just knowing that I'm here and this is what I do, eventually the right people are finding me.
It sounds like one of the things you've really found in Iowa is that it's easy to build relationships with people, whether business-oriented or in different organizations I know that you're in. Is there more to it than that, or is that what you found to be one of the highlights of practicing in Iowa?
Absolutely. Definitely, that's one of them. I think folks in Iowa are very much, I think they have a very balanced life from what I can tell. So yes, they are business people. They're working hard. They're highly educated, some of them, right? But they're also parents and their children, and they're taking care of their communities. They're volunteering, and you're getting that whole person when you meet with them, which I have found. I think New York City is probably one of those extreme examples in the other direction, where you are the work person. You have a work persona when you're at the office, and you're there so many hours, and you're commuting, and there's very little time for the other aspects of your life. And there is sort of a much more clear division, I think, between the person you bring to work Monday through Friday and then the person you might be at home. But I do think in Iowa there's a lot more integration in that way.
Yeah, I really like that you talk about the relationships. I've talked to other attorneys and other people that have moved to Iowa, and I think that's one thing that they really highlight, is there really is such a thing as Iowa nice. Mm-hmm. And I know my former legal secretary came to Iowa from California, and that was one thing he said, that people told him that, but he didn't really realize it till he lived here. Mm-hmm. And then now he wouldn't live anywhere else. He said it's just so much different. So, do you think Iowa's the kind of community where rural practitioners and smaller communities need more of people coming and being willing to practice?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's been a great decision for me and for my family and for my practice, frankly, and it's an unlikely decision. And I am used to getting the shocking reaction from my New York counterparts. But ultimately, I think if that's what people are really looking for, to be integrated with their community and their clients, it's a wonderful place to be.
And I've seen lately where lots of people are either starting their own firms or going to smaller firms. Do you think this is a trend?
I don't know so much about like globally, but I do also sense that among my peers, and maybe it is a trend. Maybe it is. And I thought it was more of like, we're getting into the age where we're more experienced and maybe more senior, more confident with our skills to be able to do that. But maybe it is more global. I do think I've met quite a few younger attorneys here that are also on their own.
So do you think people that live here understand what we have, or are we overlooking it?
I think there's a lot of pride in Iowa, the people that have grown up here, which most of the people I meet are from here and grew up here, maybe not in Des Moines, but they grew up somewhere in Iowa and ended up in Des Moines. There's a lot of pride, and I think they know that they have something really good. But I do think they don't necessarily have the comparison of what it's like somewhere else, and particularly in those somewhere else's that are really different, like a New York City, a San Juan, Puerto Rico, or California even. It's a completely different lifestyle. And so sometimes I talk to people and they're kind of shocked by the things I say about what it was like. So yes, I think they appreciate it, but they probably don't know exactly how good they have it compared to other parts of the country.
I think that's true too. I think everybody probably has that feeling that they don't really appreciate where they're from as much as other people might.
Yeah.
So do you think launching law practice in a smaller market like this, and you're in a suburb of Des Moines, so in Iowa that's a large legal market, but
Right.
do you think there's benefits to launching a law firm in a smaller market or maybe a rural area than starting a firm in a bigger place?
Absolutely. I mean, I know for me, going smaller has sort of been a theme in my career. Started big. I went to a medium-sized Midwestern firm actually in New York still. Then I went to a really small boutique that was remote. And now I have my own practice in Iowa. So it's been a trend of getting closer to the client and getting closer to the work and getting closer to the skills that I wanted to have and be able to use as a lawyer. So yeah, absolutely. And I can see that being true as well within Iowa. If you're a Des Moines attorney maybe, but you grew up in a different, smaller town, you might consider how much more exposure you'll have to the true legal practice and to your community.
I found that, like, our firm has a Des Moines office, and we have an office in Ames and Cedar Rapids too. And just even going to the Ames office, which isn't a small city in Des Moines, but just how much more client interaction I have when I go to that office versus our Des Moines office. And I really always appreciated that.
Yeah.
So what would you say to maybe young law students or younger attorneys that think success only happens if you go to a bigger firm or a bigger city?
No. Take it from me. No. I mean, I just think where you get, ultimately as an attorney, when you graduate law school, you have a vision of what you want to do. And it includes a lot of different components. And different for different practice areas and different locations. But ultimately, what you want to be is well-rounded enough to talk to someone, be able to address their concerns, identify their issues, and then help them through the legal system. That involves so many different components that if you are at a very, very large practice or in a very, very large city, you're only going to see 1% of that pie. And it will take that much longer to become that well-rounded attorney you want to be. But you can get that same experience at a smaller firm or a smaller location where you're going to be able to do a case. You might be able to do a litigation in a rural town in Iowa within 7 months, 6 months. In New York City, I don't quote anything less than 2 years.
Interesting.
That's a good example, right? If you're a solo attorney here, you might see a case from complaint to appeal, or to judgment within a few months.
I think that's a great point, because I think that's something that people don't consider, is you just see very small pieces of a case. And it's really hard to gain expertise when you're only seeing that little part.
Agreed.
You never get the whole picture of where your work's intended to end up.
Right.
You might not understand how this is going to be used in a bigger sense.
That's
And
right.
I found that too, if I only had small real estate part in a big deal without understanding the whole transaction, it was hard to give even adequate legal help because you didn't understand what the whole deal was.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are the risks of someone considering making a move like you did, coming to Iowa or coming to a smaller place to practice? Are there any risks that people should be aware of?
You want me to talk about all the little monsters in my head? Well, I mean, there's always the risk of failure, right? That's what we're all scared of, right? We don't want to do it because we've never done it before. And what if we can't? Or what if it doesn't work out? You don't know until you try, right? And I think in general in life, like once I've taken the view myself, and honestly, it didn't come to me till maybe 6 years ago or so, but once you decide what it is that you're going to do and you map out what the steps are to get there, you should almost put on a blindfold and go do it. Don't worry so much once you have your plan. It's a sound plan, you researched it, you're smart, you've thought about it, then you have to go out and do the steps. There's no other way to it. So, and I think that that's sort of where the difference is. When I was practicing in a bigger law firm, in a bigger city, I was a small piece of the puzzle, and it was hard to even set those goals. And then it was hard to follow through on some of the steps that would have gotten me there. So yeah, if you're planning to take that risk, I would definitely say have some confidence that the plan you laid out is sound. And then you have to just take the steps and surround yourselves with good people. That's the other thing that I would say, that the people around you that are supporting you and pushing you forward, I mean, that is huge, and it'll make it a lot easier and more enjoyable.
Has something come along since you started your firm that you didn't expect to happen that you've had to deal with?
I did have one client recently that, showed up for a consult, and, the payment didn't go through at the end of the day, I can't say that I didn't totally expect it, but I never had to deal with that before. And that's a hard thing, because that's one of those things that as a lawyer, you're like, I just want to do the work and help the people. But when things don't go the way that, it should, what are you going to do next, right? So those are like some of those hard things where it's like, what do I do with that? Do I spend time adjusting my process is really what I did, right? It's like, okay, I probably had to vet that a little bit better. Or I maybe had to make sure that, the money cleared, things like that.
How do you handle the stresses of you're doing your legal work too, but now you're also the manager and responsible for all the responsibilities in the office? How have you dealt with that or balanced that?
I'm not sure that I have a method. I've just embraced the role, and so there is a lot of added stress that's different from the stress of legal practice. The idea that I have 2 employees now, and they have families, and I know that they depend on that paycheck. So putting food on the table is important. Like, I no longer just think about me and my daughter. I've got a team of like 10 humans that I worry about every month and every week. And so it's just the human component and the motivation to make sure that I'm doing everything right and staying on track.
How did you decide how did you recognize when you first needed to hire someone, and how did you make that leap? To me, I've thought about opening my own practice, but I don't know if I would be able to decide when to make that leap and take that chance.
I think that's a hard decision for almost everybody when they are on their own, is should I just do it all myself, because that way I don't have to pay for anything, and I can absorb it myself. And I think for me, again, and maybe I'm starting to think I'm more of a numbers person than I thought. Just looking at my time and keeping track of my time and how much time I was spending on certain types of tasks versus billable tasks, it just became clear that there were a lot of things that I could delegate if I had someone to delegate to. And I do think we have the benefit of this particular time in the world that there's so much accessible help. Like this whole system of virtual assistants, for example, it's not that hard to find someone to help out. So I think it was less scary than it maybe would have been in the past to go out and get some help. And so that was a good thing. And I will say that being in Iowa is helpful, because there are a lot of really highly qualified people that I could actually afford to pay on a good basis. And I started out part-time with them. I didn't, go right away full-time, and gave myself a little bit of a runway to figure out, is this right for me? Can I delegate this way? How much can I delegate? So
I think that's a good process to go through. Like you said, you learned what you could delegate and what you really needed to spend your time on, and what needed your expertise versus something you could hand off to somebody.
Absolutely.
And make sure you're using the best use of your time. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah.
How does your daughter like being here?
Oh, she loves it. She loves it. She makes me beg that we'll never move. So it's funny. We do visit. We've visited New York a few times, and we visit Puerto Rico at least once a year. So she's aware of other locations, but she loves it here.
That's great to hear, and that she doesn't want to leave.
No,
Because
she's
we're
an
really,
Iowa girl.
We're really glad that you came to Iowa, and we're really glad
Thank you.
she's an Iowa girl, and so are you now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, we love it here, and everyone's been so welcoming. So it feels like home for sure.
That was great to hear.
Yeah. Thank you. Why did you choose the name Law on a Gravel Road for your podcast?
Well, Law on a Gravel Road is more than just about an attorney shortage in Iowa. It's about helping Iowa's communities thrive again. And when legal access thrives, so do the local communities and their citizens. I'm Kathy Law, and this has been Law on a Gravel Road.